Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of October of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And let's start with the city of Pokrovsk, because this evening the Russian sources published a very interesting statement that was published by Russian authorities. So this is the statement I'm talking about. The Russian Minister of Defense has received an order from the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Federation to ensure unimpeded passage for foreign journalists, including Ukrainian ones, who request access to the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command to visit the areas where Ukrainian troops are encircled in Krasnoyarsk, Dmitrov and Kupiansk. The Russian command is prepared to cease hostilities in these areas for 5-6 hours if necessary, and to provide unimpeded entry and exit corridors for groups of foreign media representatives, including Ukrainian ones, subject to security guarantees for both journalists and Russian military personnel. So the Russians are saying that the Western media, Ukrainian media, can enter the Pokrovsk cauldron and the Kupiansk cauldron with the purpose to check the situation on the ground, to talk with soldiers, to make videos, to publish these videos probably worldwide, to show these soldiers to their friends, relatives, to their parents, and to show that indeed it's not just cauldrons, it's hell on earth and nothing more. The situation, as you can see, according to this configuration of the card, is extremely difficult for the armed forces of Ukraine. So let's discuss everything once again and everything in details. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates. The Russians continue offensive operation from the north and the southern direction. The Russians are attacking the city of Mirnograd from the northeast. The Russians managed to block the 25th Airborne Brigade in the southern part of the Pokrovsk cauldron, the territory of the village of Sukhoy Yar. The Russians managed to secure almost everything to the south of the railways. The Russians began advancing in the direction of the settlement of Grishna, and which is the most important part, the Russians managed to shorten the corridor for Ukrainians for evacuation to less than 2 kilometers. According to this configuration of the map, according to different sources, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, according to neutral mappers, and according to, of course, pro-Russian experts, the distance between positions in the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk and the southern part of the settlement of Rodinska and further is less than 1 kilometer and 200 meters, which is already nothing. Nobody in the world have possibilities to use this corridor for evacuation. Everything that will try to use this corridor for evacuation would be immediately destroyed by Russia, and not just with soldiers who are currently located at this point or at this point. Everything that will try to use this corridor would be destroyed by artillery fire, by FPV drones. So just imagine yourself, the Russians can attack this territory just with artillery. They don't need to do anything else, and nobody will be able to escape. According to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made a lot of attempts to counterattack. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians made 8 attempts to break through the encirclement and to save soldiers who are currently blocking this area, but all those attempts were repelled by Russians. Ukrainians suffered huge losses and were forced to fall back. The Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, up to 180 soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine, they lost. This is the losses of Ukrainian army. And you know that the most important thing that's on Monday, when the Russians announced the creation of the Pokrovsk cauldron, there were 5,500 soldiers that were encircled. So this is the starting number. This is the number of Ukrainians at the beginning of the situation. But the problem is that by the end of the 4th day of cauldron, there are less than 5,000 soldiers left. So this is the reality. So the Ukrainians during the previous days lost around 500 soldiers, and they continue losing their soldiers without any chances for evacuation. So as we can see, the president of the Russian Federation is giving a chance to Ukrainian authorities, to Ukrainian command, to let's say to give access to Ukrainian soldiers there with press, probably with the purpose to clarify the number of wounded soldiers, probably with the purpose to understand how many soldiers requires urgent help or something like this. And of course, Russians then will start negotiations with this. They will try to probably create evacuation roads for these people. So Anyway, the situation is very complicated, but what we see the Ukrainians are doing right now, the Ukrainians are bringing more and more forces in the area of Grushin and Belitska, and the Ukrainians are not planning to do anything with the proposal that was provided by the president of the Russian Federation. According to information we have, the Ukrainians are planning to continue their counterattacks. So, and according to information we have, right before we started making this video, we got a video where we could see how Ukrainians attacked the settlement of Rodinska from the north, and that Ukrainians managed to get even this part of the settlement. So it was just an attack with infantry fighting carrier that managed to break through Russian defense probably and to get there. As of now, we don't know for sure what is the result of this counter-offensive operation. Most likely tomorrow we're gonna get additional update about the situation, but we see that Zelensky is not going to compromise about the Pokrovsk cauldron. He's going to fight, and he is going to fight until the last soldier, or at least the number of soldiers on the territory of Pokrovsk would be reduced to, let's say, 1 or 2,000. Then most likely he will start negotiation or something like this. Anyway, once again, let's take a look at the map. This is the situation by the end of the 29th of October of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 30th of October of 2025. We believe that tomorrow the map will be adjusted once again. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will give us additional details about the situation on the ground, but we believe that the first unit, the first group of forces that will surrender is the Ukrainians who are currently located in the most southern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the settlement of Sukhoyar. Today, several sources reported that these units are in big trouble, and we are talking about units of the 25th Airborne Brigade. We understand, and I believe everybody in the world understand, especially these soldiers understand, that they don't have any chances for evacuation. They will not be able to retreat first in the direction of the city of Mirnograd, then in the direction of the northern part, then in the direction of this corridor. They don't have this possibility. They don't have basically time for this. So we expect that this group of forces will surrender first, and maybe the Russians will send journalists and reporters in this direction at first time, so with the purpose to show the situation. So we expect that the southern part will collapse very soon, maybe even before the end of this weekend, before the end of this week, and right after collapse of this part of the city of Pokrovsk, of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, most likely the rest of the agglomeration will fall according to the principles of domino. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. We are waiting for additional updates and additional geolocations and videos, but once again the situation is very critical. This night we are waiting for another counter-attack from Ukrainian side with the purpose on black Ukrainians, but most likely this will bring additional losses, and that's it. Now let's go a bit back in the direction of the Zaporozhye area, where Russians continue their offensive operation as well. Today from this territory we got lots of very important updates, and the most important one is coming from the territory by the name of Krasnogorska. This video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see how Russians were fighting for the territory of this small village, how Russians were using drones, how Russians were using artillery and aviation. Lots of episodes published from this territory, and all these episodes show us how exactly the Russians were fighting for this small village. And in the final part of this video we can see at least 2 Russian soldiers that raised the Russian flag in the central part of the settlement, which most likely was abandoned by the Ukrainians several hours or a day before this video was published. And based on this video and based on the report that was published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map. So this is the situation by the end of the 29th of October of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 30th of October. So that's it. That was the last village on the Russian side of the river of Yanchul. There are no more villages along the river on the Russian side, and there are just 2 settlements left on the Ukrainian side of the same river in this direction: the settlement of Rybne and of course the settlement of Ospenovka, or the Ospenovka fortified territory. Most likely in coming days or hours, first Russians will capture the settlement of Rybne. The Russians will improve their positions to the south of Ospenovka as well, and then the major battle for this fortified area will begin. Most likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. They will retreat much earlier and much faster. Now let's discuss additional updates from this territory. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources adjusted their maps as well, and according to them, the Russians continue their offensive operation from the settlement of Poltavka in the western direction. According to the latest report, the Russians managed to get the outskirts of the settlements of Veselaya and Zelený Gai. So it seems that in coming hours, the Russians will begin offensive operation in this direction as well. And it seems that Russians will capture these villages much faster probably than the battle for Uspenovka finishes, and from these positions the Russians can continue offensive operation in the direction of the city of Gulay-Polye. And Russians will do this because they need to shorten the distance to this road between the city of Gulay-Polye and the settlement of Uspenovka. We're talking about this logistic arteria. The Russians will try to cut this arteria with the drones or physically. As soon as they do this, most likely Ukrainians will not be able to show resistance on the territory of Uspenovka. So once again, this information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian mappers. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Nikolaevka. There is, as you can see, a very huge dense network of the fortifications, and the Russians are trying to tighten the news around this territory and to capture these positions as well. Furthermore, the Russians on the Zaporozhye direction continue bombing and attacking Ukrainian logistics. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos how Russians were bombing the settlements of Danilovka and Pokrovska. In this video, we can see how Russians attacked the settlement of Danilovka, and due to this video and due to the fact that the Russians were attacking temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area, we believe that the settlement of Danilovka is the next target of the 29th or 36th armies of the armed forces of the Russian Federation who are operating in this area. So when talking about Uspenovka, this is the area of responsibilities of the 5th Army. So most likely this village would be captured also very soon. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the bridges along the river of Volcha. In this video, we can see how the Russians reduced till ruins the bridge between the northern and the southern parts of the settlement of Pokrovska. As a result of this attack, as you can see, the Russians managed to deal significant damage to the bridge, and the bridge at the end was completely destroyed. Furthermore, the Russians bombed the central part of the settlement itself, so we see that one of the supply and one of the logistic roads was completely destroyed. Here we can see Russians sent a drone with the purpose to make a double check and to understand the exact status of this area, so the bridge was completely destroyed without any chances to fix it. Furthermore, several vehicles were damaged as well. So Ukrainians have no chances to supply their contingent on the territory of these villages between the river of Volcha and the river of Yanchul. We are talking about Novoalexandrovka, Gaiva, Radna, Andreevka, and as we discussed in the previous videos, most likely Russians will capture these villages before moving further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Gulay-Polye. So we believe that the village of Gulay-Polye could be caught in pincers within the next months or months and a half, and then we're gonna start watching and following the situation with another cauldron in the special military operation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sivers direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates. We have huge changes on the ground, as you can see. This is the situation by the end of the 29th of October of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 30th of October of 2025. The Russians improved their positions to the west of the settlement of Novoselovka. Now the Russians are trying to tighten the news and to shorten the distance to the city of Siversk itself. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions along the railways between the cities of Vyimka and Siversk. This video was published today by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see how a soldier of the armed forces of the Russian Federation dropped a grenade on position of Ukrainian army, and then there was an explosion. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map by coloring additional territories along the railways. Furthermore, and this is a very important piece of news, the Ukrainian sources published this video, and this is the first evidence, the first proof that Russians answered the settlement of Zvanovka, and that by the end of the 30th of October of 2025, the Russians have captured up to 25% of the settlement, which means that the Russians are moving further in the northern southern direction, trying to shorten the distance to the city of Siversk itself, also from the southern direction. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue clearing operation in the pocket between the settlements of Zvanovka and Vyemka. Today we got this video where we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning Russians that were moving in this pocket, trying to secure and to clear this territory. Based on this video, we made a small adjustment exactly in this area. So here we can see a few attacks that were carried out by Ukrainians. So now we see that Russians are tasked to maintain the lines, along this red line and to capture everything in this, let's say, territory. This will allow the Russians to take the city of Siversk in pincers and to create an operational encirclement, because from these positions, Russians, and this is a very important situation, Russians will be able to establish a certain control over this territory. So what is this territory? This is this area lays on the settlement of Sveta-Pokrovskaya, and here we can see probably the only supply line that Ukrainians still have to support their contingent on the territory of the city of Siversk itself. If Russians can establish a certain type of control over the territory, either with, let's say, physical, with soldiers or with drones, this is going to lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense on the city of Siversk. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that Russians have already established complete control over this part of TO513 road with FPV drones, but it doesn't matter. It even doesn't matter, because several sources reported that the Russians are about to capture the settlement of Yampol, which will give the same result. The Russians will establish control over the same road, but a bit further in the northwestern direction. Here we're going to see the same results. Yes, Ukrainians most likely will be able to use the road through the settlements of Zakitna, Kriva Luka, but Russians certainly will establish complete FPV drone control with this territory. So we believe that before the end of the Kupiansk cauldron, or before the end of the Pokrovsk cauldron, we're gonna see the beginning of the Siversk cauldron. This is going to be a third cauldron in a row, and right after the end of the Siversk cauldron, we believe that we're gonna see the Gulay Pole cauldron. So up to 4 cauldrons along the line across Ukraine, across the current line of combat contact, we may see during the next 2 or 3 months. So, and this can lead, we need to understand this, to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense, and most important, to complete collapse of control of army by Ukrainian general staff, because Ukrainians and Ukrainian soldiers can stop give trust to the Ukrainian commanders, which is much more worse situation than just collapse of this or that part of the front line that can be stabilized in the future. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates that confirm presence of the armored force of the Russian Federation on the territory of the city of Liman. Here we can see a building that was captured by Russians, and the building was attacked by Ukrainian FPV drone. This video took place exactly at these points, and based on this video we adjusted the map. So now we have proofs that Russians answered the city of Liman, and the Russians are advancing slowly but very slowly, but step by step. Furthermore, several sources reported today, mainly pro-Russian sources, that Russians have already entered the city of Liman also from this territory, and some sources are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes exactly along this red line. So the Russians are about to capture all this territory, and if the Russians are able to do this, then the battle for the city of Liman would be finished even faster than started, because this is the main positions. These are the main positions of the city of Liman. Without them, there is no need and no reason to probably defend the entire city, because anyway you will not be able to do this. It's going to be just a waste of time and soldiers, and right after Ukrainians lose control after this territory, it's better to start thinking how to evacuate soldiers on the Ukrainian side of the river of Seversky Donetsk, which most likely will be started automatically. And now let's talk about the city of Kupiansk. I would like to remind you, this is the area of the second cauldron that was created by Russians. And today we got probably one of the most important and interesting updates exactly from this area. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the armored forces of the Russian Federation of the Group of Forces West managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Sadova. So this is a small village to the west of the city of Kupiansk-Uzlavoy and to the west of the river Voskol. So this village was captured, and today, based on the report of the Minister of Defense, most of the mappers adjusted their maps. telling the truth, and I believe that nobody in the world, just the Minister of Defense and probably the group of forces West, knows how exactly the Russians managed to capture the settlement. So telling the truth, we added these changes on the ground softly. We just connected the settlement of Sadovo, where the positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation, the territory of the Western Kupiansk, because I'm telling you once again, nobody knows how exactly Russians managed to capture. We don't have geolocations, we don't have videos and so on. Maybe the Russians by the end of the 30th of October have already established complete control over these territories. We don't know, and nobody knows, just the Minister of Defense and the group of forces West. Because during the same report, let's say, report that was published by the Minister of Defense, the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack, and the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack with the purpose attempting to regain control over the Oskol River crossing site near Sadovo, Kharkiv region. So the Ukrainians are trying to tell, the Minister of Defense is trying to tell us that Ukrainians were counterattacking in the area of the settlement of Sadovo. So this is the settlement of Sadovo with the purpose to regain control over the river crossing. So once again, let's open this report. So to attempt to restore control over this territory. And the thing is that this is the village of Sadovo, and this is the only, let's say, place where Ukrainians used for river crossing purposes is this one. So based on this report, the Russians, at least by the end of 30th of October or by the beginning, were controlling this territory as well. And Ukrainians were trying to counterattack in this area with the purpose to restore control over this river crossing. So very weird report. Once again, nobody knows for sure how exactly to adjust the map. Some mappers adjusted their maps. We have some information about counterattacks, but once again, I just want to point your attention and to tell you that most likely the situation to the west of the city of Kupiansk-Ozlovoy is much worse that you can see right now in front of your screens. And obviously, after the end or after the fall of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, we will start talking about the Kupiansk agglomeration. By this time, Ukrainians most likely will be able to reduce the number of forces there from 5,000 to, let's say, 3,500. But this is also a very big number, and Russians will try to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow these 3.5 thousand soldiers to escape this cauldron. And right after the end of the Kupiansk cauldron, most likely we're going to start talking about the Siversk cauldron, and right after the end of the Siversk cauldron, we're going to start talking about the cauldron of the city by the name of Gulay-Polye. So as you can see, the situation is very complicated. Ukraine has huge problems with manpower. Lots of people, lots of soldiers don't want to fight. They're just leaving the front line, leaving their barracks, leaving their armies, leaving their positions. And Ukraine has a big army just on the paper. When talking about the real number of forces along the line of combat contact, we see that this is not just a huge problem. This is the biggest disaster ever since the beginning of the special military operation for Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.